In a grand palace surrounded by glittering walls and well-tended gardens lived Prince Adedayo, the only child of King Olumide and Queen Tunu. From the outside, Adedayo seemed to have everything a boy could want. Rich clothes embroidered with gold thread, servants who waited on him day and night, and feasts filled with the finest foods from across the world. Yet, Adedayo was unhappy. He would sit by the large palace window watching children play outside the palace gate. Their laughter carried in by the breeze. They ran barefoot in the dust, chasing each other with sticks, free and wild. Adedayo longed to be like them. If only I could live a day without the rules, he whispered to himself. Every day in the palace felt the same. Lessons on how to bow properly, how to speak like a prince, and long, boring meetings with advisors who droned on about things Adedayo didn't care about. It felt like a bird trapped in a golden cage. One morning, after yet another dull lesson on diplomacy, Adedayo approached his mother. "Mother, why must I do all these things?" he asked. Queen Itunu smiled and touched his cheek. "Because you are a prince, my dear, and one day you will be king." But Adedayo didn't feel like a prince, and more than anything, he didn't want to be king. One day, Adedayo decided to sneak out of the palace. He had done it before, disguising himself in plain clothes and slipping past the guards. The thrill of the forbidden adventure always gave him a strange sense of freedom. This time, Adedayo made his way to the bustling marketplace, where traders sold colorful fabrics, sweet-smelling spices, and fruits of every kind. Children ran between the stalls laughing and shouting, and for a moment Adedayo allowed himself to blend in with the crowd. It was in the corner of the market square that he saw Ojo for the first time. Ojo was a beggar, sitting with his back against a crumbling wall. His clothes tattered and dusty. He held out a small, dirty bowl, hoping for a few coins. But what startled Adedayo was how much Ojo looked exactly like him. The same brown eyes, the same sharp nose, even the same curly hair. Adedayo couldn't help but stare. He crouched beside the beggar and asked, "Who are you?" Ojo squinted up at him suspiciously. "Who is asking?" Adedayo grinned. "I am just a boy like you." Ojo laughed bitterly. "You, a boy like me? Your clothes tell a different story." The prince glanced at his plain but neat tunic and sandals. Ojo was right. Even in disguise, Adedayo still looked cleaner and better fed than anyone on the street. After a moment of silence, Adedayo leaned closer. "Let's trade places, just for a day." Ojo blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" "Your life," Adedayo whispered, "and mine. We will switch. I will be you and you will be me for one day." Ojo tilted his head, studying the boy in front of him. His eyes narrowed with both curiosity and skepticism. "Why would you want to live my life? You won't survive a day on the streets." Adedayo smiled. "Maybe not, but I want to try, just for one day." Ojo scratched his head, still unsure, but the idea of living like a prince, even for just a day, was too tempting to resist. He had nothing to lose. And so, under the shade of a mango tree, they made their switch. Adedayo removed his neat tunic and sandals, handed them over to Ojo. In return, Ojo gave Adedayo his ragged clothes, filled with holes and the faint smell of sweat. Adedayo didn't flinch. He put them on without hesitation. When they were done, they stood back and looked at each other. It was like looking into a mirror. Ojo laughed and gave a little bow. "Greetings, my prince," he said, mocking Adedayo. Adedayo agreed, and "Greetings, beggar boy." They agreed to meet back at the same spot by sunset to switch back. Until then, each would live the other's life. Ojo gave a sly smile. "Good luck, your highness. You will need it." Adedayo laughed, feeling a thrill of excitement. "And you, Ojo, try not to get lost in the palace." And with that, they went their separate ways, each eager to explore their new life. At first, Adedayo felt free, running barefoot through the dusty streets. He tried begging like Ojo, holding out the dirty bowl as people passed, but no one gave him anything. Some sneered at him, others ignored him altogether. As the day wore on, hunger glowed at his belly. He hadn't eaten since morning, and the smells of roasted meat and fresh bread from nearby stores only made things worse. "Please," he whispered to a woman selling bread, "just a small piece." The woman looked him up and down. "Get lost, beggar boy. No freebies here." Adedayo stumbled away, realizing how hard life on the street truly was. Freedom didn't taste as sweet when it came with hunger and cold stares. Meanwhile, Ojo walked boldly through the palace gates, dressed in Adedayo's fine clothes. The guards bowed as he passed, assuming he was the prince. Ojo could hardly believe it. He was inside the grand palace, surrounded by luxury. He was bathed, fed, and treated with respect. For the first time in his life, he slept on a soft bed, with servants attending to his every need. "This is the life," Ojo whispered to himself, grinning from year to year. "Why should I ever go back?" By nightfall, Ojo had made up his mind. He would not return to the street. As the sun set, Adedayo returned to the mango tree, tired and hungry, expecting Ojo to be there. But the minutes passed and Ojo never came. Adedayo waited until the moon rose high in the sky, but there was no sign of the beggar. Ojo had betrayed him. Desperation weighed up inside Adedayo. He ran to the palace gate, calling out to the guards, "Let me in, I am Prince Adedayo." The guards laughed. "You, a prince? Go away, beggar boy." And with that, the gate slammed shut, leaving Adedayo standing in the cold night air. His heart heavy with the realization he was truly trapped in Ojo's life. The night air was cold, and Prince Adedayo shivered as he curled up in a corner near the palace walls. He had no blanket to keep him warm, and the hard ground was nothing like the soft mattress he was used to. His empty stomach growled loudly, but the guards inside the palace were deaf to his cries. Why would Ojo do this? Adedayo whispered to himself. His heart ached with betrayal. The switch was supposed to be fun. A game for just one day. Now it seemed like he had lost everything. As sleep finally took over, Adedayo dreamed of his mother's gentle voice and his father's booming laugh. But when he woke up the next morning, the cold reality of the street greeted him. Days passed and Adedayo struggled to adapt to street life. He roamed the market begging for scraps of food, but he was often ignored or chased away. His hands and feet grew rough from walking barefoot on the ground. One day, a boy about his age named Ayo noticed him sitting by a well, looking defeated. Ayo was small but sharp, with quick hands that could pick a pocket faster than lightning. "You are new here," Ayo said, sitting next to Adedayo. "What's your story?" Adedayo hesitated. How could he explain what had happened without sounding mad? "Let's just say I lost something important," he replied, trying to hide his frustration. Ayo smirked. "Around here, we all lost something. If you want to survive, you will need friends. Lucky for you, I like helping lost boys." Over the next few weeks, Ayo taught Adedayo how to live on the street, where to find leftover food, which merchants were kind enough to give bread, and which hurdles to avoid. Slowly, Adebayo learned how to endure hunger and cold without complaint. Though his heart longed for the palace, he knew he needed to grow stronger before he could return. Meanwhile, Ojo was thriving in the palace. His days were filled with luxury, feast of roasted meats, servants at his beck and call, and soft silk robes that made him feel like royalty. At first, the palace staff noticed how different Prince Adebayo had become, but they attributed it to a newfound boldness. However, Ojo's arrogance soon became a problem. He was reckless, careless with royal matters, and quick to dismiss the advice of the king counselors. One day, when the palace cook accidentally served his food cold, Ojo angrily demanded the cook be fired. This is how princes behave, right? Ojo muttered to himself, convincing himself that harshness equaled power. The king grew concerned. Adedayo has changed, he whispered to Queen Tunu one night. He was always mischievous, but this is different. There's something strange about him. Queen Tunu sighed. Perhaps he's just growing up. But deep down, the king felt something was wrong. One evening, after gathering enough courage, Ayo and Adedayo hatched her plan. Adedayo would sneak back into the palace during a grand festival when the gates would be open, allowing merchants and guests to enter freely. This is your chance, Ayo said, patting Adedayo on the back. If you really are who you say you are, then go take what's yours. Adedayo nodded. I would switch everything back, even if it's the last thing I do. That night, the palace glittered with lanterns and music. Adedayo slipped past the gates, mingling with the crowd. His heart pounded as he made his way towards the royal hall where Ojo sat on the throne, draped in fine robes pretending to be ill. Adedayo pushed through the crowd until he stood face to face with Ojo. It's over, Ojo, he whispered. We switch back now. Ojo smiled, leaning forward. You are too late, Prince. This is my life now. I like it here and I'm not leaving. Adedayo's fist clenched. We had a deal. Ojo gave a low mocking laugh. Deals are for fools and you are no prince anymore. The brief encounter between Ojo and Adebayo did not go unnoticed. From his seat on the balcony, King Olumide watched the strange exchange between the two boys. Something about the beggar in rags stirred a memory in the king's mind. Summon that boy, the king ordered one of his guards. I want to speak with him. But before the guard could act, Ojo raised his voice. Guards, throw that beggar out of the palace. He is nothing but a troublemaker. The guards hesitated but obeyed. They dragged Adedayo away despite his protest. As Adedayo was thrown back onto the street, tears welled up in his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He wouldn't give up, not yet. The encounter with Adedayo shook Ojo more than he wanted to admit. Though he had succeeded in getting Adedayo thrown out, a seed of fear took root in his heart. What if the king discovered the truth? Ojo's paranoia grew. He began dismissing loyal servants, accusing them of plotting against him. He even started avoiding the king, worried that the old man's sharp eyes might see through his disguise. Everyone is against me, Ojo muttered one night, pacing in his chambers. I have to be careful. I can't let anyone take this life from me. No, I can't. His once joyful experience in the palace was slowly turning into a nightmare of fear and mistrust. Days later, King Olumide summoned Ojo to his chambers. "Son," he said carefully, "tell me something. What did we do on your 17th birthday?" Ojo blinked, his mind racing. We had a feast?" The king's eye narrowed. "No, we went to the river to fish. Just the two of us. The real Adedayo would remember that." Ojo stammered, but it was too late. The king knew. Before the king could have him arrested, Ojo fled the palace, leaving behind the life he had stolen. He knew the streets would be waiting for him, but this time, they would not welcome him back. The day after Ojo's escape, King Olumide summoned Adedayo from the street. The guards, acting on the king's order, found the boy who had been thrown out and brought him to the palace. When Adedayo entered the royal hall, dirty and exhausted, his heart raced with both hope and fear. Queen Tunu gasped when she saw him. This is my son," she cried, rushing to embrace him. Tears streamed down her face as she held Adedayo close, her mother's heart knowing the truth without needing further proof. King Olumide placed a hand on Adedayo's shoulder. "My boy, it is time to come home." For the first time in weeks, Adedayo felt safe. His place as the prince was restored and Ojo's reign of deceit was over. But deep in his heart, Adedayo knew that this was not the end of the story. Ojo was still out there, and he couldn't help but wonder what the beggar fate would be. After fleeing the palace, Ojo returned to the streets, but they were no longer the same. The friends he had once known, the other beggars and the street kids no longer trusted him. "Look at him," one of them sneered, "the prince who pretended to be one of us." Ojo begged for food. But now, even the kindest merchants turned him away. His betrayal had spread like wildfire across the market, and the streets rejected him, just as he had rejected Adedayo. Days passed and Ojo grew thin with hunger. He slept in dirty alleys, haunted by memories of the palace and the life he had thrown away. Every night, he dreamt of the fine clothes, soft beds, and endless feasts. And every morning, he woke up cold and hungry. Back in the palace, Adedayo felt changed. His time on the street had opened his eyes to the suffering of the poor. He saw the beggars outside the palace gates with new understanding and compassion. One day, he approached his father. "Father, we need to do more for the people outside the palace. I saw how hard their lives are." King Olumide smiled, proud of his son. "You have grown, Adedayo. You now understand what it means to be king, not just power, but responsibility." From that day on, Adedayo made it his mission to help the poor. He ordered food and clothing to be distributed at the palace gate and began working with his advisors to create shelters for the homeless. But even as he worked to make life better for others, one face lingered in his mind: Ojo. One raining afternoon, as Adedayo walked through the market in disguise, he saw Ojo sitting under a crumbling awning, soaked and shivering. For a moment, Adedayo stood still, watching the boy who had stolen his life. Ojo's eyes were hollow. His face was gone from hunger. The proud, arrogant boy who had once sat on the throne was now a shadow of himself. Adedayo approached slowly. "Ojo," he whispered. Ojo looked up, his expression a mixture of shame and regret. "It's you," he muttered, his voice hoarse. Adedayo crawled beside him. "Why didn't you come back? We could have switched like we agreed." Ojo gave a bitter laugh. "I thought I could keep it all, I thought I deserve it. He coughed. His breath dragged, but it was never really mine, was it? Adedayo's heart softened. Despite everything, he couldn't shake the pity he felt for Ojo. Come back with me, he said gently. We'll find a way to help you. For a brief moment, hope flickered in Ojo's eye, but then he shook his head. No, he whispered. I don't belong there. I never did. Adedayo reached into his pocket and handed Ojo a loaf of bread and a few coins. Take this at least, he said. Ojo accepted the bread with trembling hands. Thank you for everything. But as Adedayo walked away, a deep sadness settled in his heart. He knew that some choices couldn't be undone and that not everyone could be saved. The next morning, the news spread through the markets like wildfire. Ojo had been found lifeless in an alley, clutching the loaf of bread Adedayo had given him. Some said he had succumbed to hunger and exhaustion. Others whispered that his broken heart had taken him. When Adedayo heard the news, his heart ached with grief. He had hoped Ojo might find a way to survive, but the weight of his choices had been too much to bear. That night, Adedayo stood by the palace window, staring out at the streets below. The same street where he had once won free, and Ojo had dreamed of power. The stars twinkled above, indifferent to the joys and sorrows of the people below. Adedayo sighed. He just wanted a better life, he whispered to himself. But sometimes, wanting isn't enough. From that day forward, Adedayo ruled with wisdom and compassion, always remembering the lesson he had learned. Greed and deceit lead only to sorrow, but kindness is what makes a king. Years passed, and Prince Adedayo grew into a beloved king, known for his fairness and generosity. But the memory of Ojo stayed with him, like a shadow that never faded. Whenever Adedayo saw a beggar boy in the market, he would pause, offering them food or a kind word, and in his heart, he would whisper a silent prayer for Ojo, the boy who had reached for the stars but lost himself along the way. This didn't end well. I hope you have learnt a lesson not to be greedy and not to betray people who trust us. If you find this very interesting, please do not forget to subscribe, like, and share. I'll see you in my next story. Mwah.